Hello, I'm Christina Ewig. I'm the director of the Center on Women, Gender, and Public Policy at the Humphrey School of Public Affairs. I would like to extend a warm welcome to all of you who are joining us today. We have a large group, which I'm very pleased about. Please note that today's event features simultaneous translation between English and Spanish. Here are some brief instructions on accessing the interpretation function in Zoom. From a laptop or a desktop, you should have a globe icon. Or from a tablet or phone, you can fit an interpretation as a menu option under the ellipsis icon of 3 dots. If you require translation, select the language you prefer, English or Spanish. El día de hoy tenemos traducción simultáneo español-inglés. Si quieres traducción, apache donde ves el globo si estás en un PC o un Mac. Allí puedes seleccionar la idioma que prefieres y después Apache Start. Desde un teléfono o un tablet puedes Apache los tres, el menú de los 3 puntos y seleccionar su idioma y después Apache Start. With that, I'd like to now pause a moment and begin our session today with a land acknowledgement. The University of Minnesota, Twin Cities, is located on traditional, ancestral, and contemporary lands of Indigenous people. The university resides on Dakota land ceded in the treaties of 1837 and 1851. The hosts of today's event acknowledge this place as a complex and layered history. This land acknowledgement is one of the ways in which we work to educate the campus and the community about this land and our relationship with it and each other. I'm very pleased to introduce today the second in a series of 3 events hosted here at the University of Minnesota to mark International Women's Day on the theme of gender, COVID-19, and human rights. I hope that you were able to join us this Tuesday when we heard a keynote lecture by Dr. Sanat Faseha, Director of International Programs for the Susan Buffett Foundation and Chief Advisor to the Director of the World Health Organization. She spoke on the global state of reproductive health, and it was a fascinating talk and conversation. Today, we feature a panel discussion titled Stopping Femicide, COVID-19 Renewed Urgency. And next Wednesday, we will host our own Dr. Rahel Nardos, Director of Global Women's Health at the UMN Center for Global Health and Social Responsibility. She will speak on Obstetric Fistula, a window into disparities in women's health, and call for a reimagining global health engagements. This series of events, all 3, is hosted by 5 units at the University of Minnesota, the Center on Women, Gender, and Public Policy at the Humphrey School of Public Affairs, the Center of Global Health and Social Responsibility, the Human Rights Program, the Women's Center, and the Interdisciplinary Center for the Study of Global Change, or ICGC. As part of our annual International Women's Day commemorations, we often partner with local organizations who are doing important work related to women here in Minnesota, across the nation, or globally. And this year, we are very pleased to partner with Global Rights for Women. Global Rights for Women has been a long-term partner with many of the units engaged in planning in this year's International Women's Day events, including the Center on Women, Gender, and Public Policy and the Human Rights Program. In fact, many of our master's students that have interests in global human rights have benefited from internship opportunities with GRW over the years. Global Rights for Women is a Minneapolis-based human rights organization that works with leaders around the world to advance women's and girls' human right to life free of violence. Specifically, Global Rights for Women works with international and domestic partners to provide customized trainings grounded in local advocacy on bettering responses to violence against women and girls. Global Rights for Women values are guided by including the voices of women and girls who are survivors of gender-based violence, collaborative global partnerships, a sustained commitment to justice, safety, and equality for all, and a recognition that violence against women intersects with multiple systems of oppression. We're very pleased to have Cheryl Thomas, women's rights attorney and founder and chief executive of Global Rights for Women, moderating today's panel. Since 1993, Cheryl has worked with partners around the world to promote women's human rights and achieve effective legal reform on violence against women. She has provided consultation and training on best practices in legal reform on violence against women to government officials, legal professionals, and civil society groups in over 30 countries. In 2008, Cheryl was selected as one of 15 experts from around the world to participate in the United Nations expert group meeting and publish a report on good practices in legislation on violence against women. In 2009, she participated in a second UN expert group meeting in Ethiopia. That expert group published a report in 2010 focused on harmful practices against women. Throughout her career, she has published numerous articles and reports on violence against women as a human rights abuse. And in March 2011, she was recognized by Newsweek magazine as one of 150 women who shake the world. Two more administrative notes before I hand the floor over to Cheryl, who will introduce our amazing panel of speakers that I'm thrilled to hear from today. First, a reminder to those who have just joined us that simultaneous translation is available by clicking on the interpretation button, either at the bottom of your screen or under the ellipses icon. Un recuerdo que tenemos traducción simultáneo y se puede usar usando el icono al fondo de tu pantalla, o si estás en un teléfono o un tablet, usando los puntos que veas en su pantalla y seleccionar su idioma. A second housekeeping note, we will be using the Q&A function of Zoom to gather your questions to the three panelists, and we invite your questions at any time and hope to engage in a robust discussion with you. Thank you, and now to Cheryl.
Thank you so much, Christina, and Rachel, and all the partners at the University of Minnesota for this collaboration to commemorate International Women's Day on Monday with this event featuring these incredible leaders. I'm just really so honored who you all have dedicated your life work to ending violence against women, and we're just thrilled that you can be with us here today and share your knowledge and your experience. And welcome to all the participants. We're thrilled to have you here with us also. My colleague, Pat Cumby, will be monitoring the chat box for the questions. And we hope to start the question and discussion period in about 45 minutes at 12:45, that's Central Standard Time. So we'll have enough time to take your questions and comments and input for about a half an hour before we close. We are all really interested in engaging you in this discussion, in addition to sharing the experience of these amazing panelists. So I'm going to begin with a brief introduction of each of these women. And then I hope they'll tell you a little bit more about themselves when they first start answering our first questions. So Patricia Olamendia Torres is the coordinator of the Convention of Belém de Pará and the director of the Training Institute for Justice and Human Rights. Patricia has been deeply involved for decades in ending violence against women in Latin America. And she has offered us also an excellent summary of information in the form of a slide presentation that's included as a resource as part of this panel. And Rachel will show you that at the end. Welcome, Patricia. Dr. Dubravka Simonovic is the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women. And Dubravka is tasked with the huge job of reporting to the United Nations General Assembly and the United Nations Human Rights Commission about, and working with other UN agencies and organizations around the world on the global dynamics of violence against women and girls. She collects statistics where they exist and reports country by country to the United Nations on what's happening in each place regarding violence against women. You can see one of her early reports also in the resources that we'll share at the end of the panel discussion. Welcome to you, Dubravka. And Nicole Matthews, welcome Nicole, the Executive Director of the Minnesota Indian Women's Sexual Assault Coalition and Vice Chair of the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women's Task Force, which recently published a powerful and disturbing report on this topic and reported to the legislature of Minnesota on that. And her report, the report of that task force to our legislature here in Minnesota, is also offered in our resources that you'll see in the slides at the end of the panel. So before we begin our questions for each of you, I'd like to just offer a definition of what femicide is. And this one in particular is from the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women. Femicide is defined as the killing of women because of their sex or gender. It constitutes the most extreme form of violence against women and the most violent manifestation of discrimination against women and their inequality. Another concise definition that I feel is just very direct is from the Inter-American Court of Human Rights, defining femicide as the murder of girls and women for the sole reason of their gender. And then one last one I think is really important is from the Belém do Pará Convention on Violence, which defines femicide, and thank you for this, Patricia, I read this in your materials, the murder of women because they are women, whether it is committed by within the family, a domestic partnership, or any other interpersonal relationship, or by anyone in the community, whether it is perpetrated or tolerated by the state or its agents. So that gives another kind of perspective on what we are going to be talking about today and the experience of the women here. So as I said, Dubravka, Nicole, and Patricia, please do feel free to say a bit more about yourselves and your experience before you answer the individual questions that I'm going to pose to you. I know that our participants would appreciate that very much. Each of you has taken a leadership role in exposing and ending femicide globally, in your regions and in your communities. So we'd love it if you would describe what statistics or other information what inspired you? What inspired your commitment to shine a light on femicide and to act to end it? So maybe we could start with you, Dubravka, and kind of in the global perspective. You were drawn to take on this huge job. You have traveled in your tenure to multiple countries. You have engaged with local, national, and international leaders. What inspired that?
Thank you. Let me start by thanking you for inviting me to participate in this important panel on stopping femicides. And let me start with a brief introduction of this mandate of United Nations Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women, its causes and consequences. So this mandate was established in 1994 by, at that time, UN Commission on Human Rights, now it is Human Rights Council, in order to send a clear message that violence against women is a human rights violation, and to establish specific expert human rights mechanism and trust it to recommend measures to states how to eliminate violence against women. I have started in 2015, so I'm now at the end of my tenure of 6 years. And in past 6 years, I have traveled to 10 countries. I have produced 11 thematic reports. And with respect to femicides, I have started early to address femicides. In my reports. So in 2015, immediately when I was appointed by UN as Special Rapporteur, I have called all states on International Day on Elimination of Violence Against Women to establish a Femicide Watch or Femicide Observatory dedicated to prevention of femicides all over the world. And then the next step was that country were asking, so how we can do it? What are comparable data? What are good practices? So I was prompted then in 2016 to elaborate report that was presented to General Assembly on modalities on establishment of a femicide watch or observatory, or it could be an observatory on violence against women, that is mandated also to collect data and analyze cases on femicides. So in 2016, I have started, and what I have seen from the beginning was what you have already mentioned. Problems with terminology, because some states are using term femicide, but many others around the world are not using term femicide, they're using term homicide. So in order to bridge kind of this gap, I am using femicides or gender-related killings of women, because at the UN level, gender-related killings of women is accepted term, and there is specific resolution adopted by General Assembly on gender-related killings of women. So
we really want to capture every word, and our interpreter is needing just to have a little bit more time to interpret. Thank you so much.
Okay, so the basic understanding was that in all states, all over the world, countries collect homicide data. But if you ask about femicide data, there is a problem. They do not have femicide data. And in order to send a clear message how to collect comparable data on gender-related killings of women, I have started with methodology that was also discussed by UNODC, UN organ that is collecting data on homicides, how to extract from homicide data what are really femicide data or gender-related killings of women. And in this proposal initiative that I have started, I'm sending a message that there are two specific comparable categories of homicides that are gender-related killings of women or femicides, intimate partner homicides or family-related homicides. If you look at category of intimate partner homicides in all countries that are now having such data, and we have relationship between victim and perpetrator. So this is key. We can see that in many countries all over the world, there is no such data. Countries do not collect data in which we have relationship between victim and the perpetrator. And this is crucial to see this category of intimate partner killings. All states that now collect such data are now revealing that more than 80% of persons killed in such intimate partner killings context are women. So this is showing that this should be category for prevention of such femicides. And for that reason, I have advocated first collection of data, then establishment of national observatories, femicide watches, different names could be used at the national level. It could be also ombudspersons and so on. They should analyze cases of femicides, emblematic cases and all cases that are happening in the country concerned. And based on analysis of cases, they are determining shortcomings at the national level, because we are seeing many similarities related to weak protection orders, related to lack of shelters. Different measures are not available, that are not administrated properly, and so on. So such bodies should do analysis of cases, and they should recommend measures how to prevent similar cases from happening through changes of laws, changes of policy, changes of conduct of police or prosecutors, and so on. So basically now this is long-term initiative, and each year on International Day on Elimination of Violence Against Women, I'm calling states to send me data on establishment of such bodies at the national level, and data on cases of intimate partner killings, family-related killings, and on analysis of cases. In past 5 years, I have seen establishment of such bodies in more than 30 states. And there are data coming in that are revealing, specifically in this category of intimate partner killings, that there are many preventive measures that we can compare, that we can really use as a tool to prevent femicides. So I would stop here because I think that there is a possibility for further elaboration discussion later. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much, Dubravka. I noted in your report that you are really emphasizing the need for data as a tool to bring on those in power to understand the severity of this problem and address it. So thank you for that. So Nicole, why don't we go to you next? You have taken such a leadership role in our community here in Minnesota, bringing to light the just devastating issue that we have here locally on missing and murdered Indigenous women. What inspired you to do this incredibly difficult work, which is so important, being highlighted in our state now, really in a way I think that it hasn't before?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. And thank you for having me today. I'll start out by giving a little bit more introduction of myself. Manadu Baneshikwe Indigenous Migisian Dodane. I am Anishinaabe. My family is from the White Earth Band of Ojibwe here in Minnesota. And I have been with the coalition for it'll be 19 years on International Women's Day. So we have been doing this work from the very beginning. And what really inspired us and was, really more about the lack of data. And, Dubravka was also mentioning there isn't any data that's collected. And for our Indigenous relatives here, this is our land, this is where we are from, this is our home, and there is little to no data on what is happening to our sisters and to our community members. And so really that is one of the biggest reasons that inspired many people, including our organization and including many women across Minnesota and across Turtle Island, and our Canadian relatives as well. And so, with our task force, we were really fortunate here to have some really incredible leadership, I think, from some Native women in the Minnesota legislature who really worked hard to make sure that we could have our voices heard. And what we knew from the little data that we have is we know that the rates of violence against Native women are extremely high. And we suffer some of the highest rates of violent victimization of any other race or ethnicity in this country, and primarily at the hands of non-Native men. And so we knew some of that data. We also knew from our work on our Garden of Truth report, where we interviewed 105 of our Native sisters in Minnesota on their experiences being used in prostitution and trafficking. We knew that of the risk factors, we knew that many of them, about 98% of them, were currently or previously homeless. We knew that about 80% of them knew of a woman who had gone missing and they had never seen or heard from her again. So we had some data, but really what inspired us to do more was the fact that there's such a lack of data. And so I think we're missing in all aspects of that.
Thank you so much, Nicole. And then I would love to get into some of those statistics that you all found as you delved into this issue with the task force in this incredible report. So thank you for that. Patricia, thank you so much for joining us
Muchas gracias.
today.
Muchas gracias y agradezco la invitación que me hicieron. Me siento muy honrada, muy feliz de estar con ustedes. Soy Patricia Olamendi, soy una abogada, tengo más de 40 años de trabajar como abogada. Tengo un doctorado en Derechos Humanos y en Derecho Criminal y me he enfocado mucho en las reformas en mi país. Desde 1989 empezamos las primeras reformas en materia de derechos humanos de las mujeres en México. Las reformas fueron para sancionar la violencia sexual. Quiero decirles que en países como el mío, México, es complejo realizar ciertas reformas porque tenemos una herencia muy ligada al machismo, al control. Cuando hicimos las primeras reformas de violencia sexual, todavía en México, era normal que un violador se casara con su víctima. Era normal el secuestro de niñas. Y el matrimonio estaba permitido para las niñas desde los 12 años de edad. Entonces, estas reformas fueron muy fuertes. Logramos incluso que finalmente se sancionara en nuestro país incluso la violación en el matrimonio. Hoy en día tenemos esas reformas. Logramos en el 96 modificar la violencia en el hogar para sancionar y castigar la violencia doméstica. Fue también una reforma muy fuerte en nuestro país, acostumbrado a que en México la violencia doméstica era algo cotidiano. Y producto de nuestras tragedias, que quizá todos ustedes conocen, como Campo Algodonero, las muertes de mujeres en Ciudad Juárez, Chihuahua, salió a la luz algo brutal, y es el asesinato de muchísimas mujeres que en un principio se pensó que era un homicida serial y después nos dimos cuenta que era el asesinato de las mujeres por el solo hecho de ser mujeres, por ser mujeres que buscaban un futuro mejor para su familia. Campo Algodonero es hoy en día el caso más emblemático de feminicidio en el mundo. De ahí que las mexicanas tuvimos que trabajar mucho para poner el tipo penal de feminicidio en nuestra ley. A mí me tocó la redacción de ese delito. En 2012 presentamos a nuestro Congreso Nacional el tipo penal de feminicidio. ¿Y qué decimos? Es el asesinato de mujeres por razones de género. Es el asesinato de mujeres que puede iniciar con una violencia física, puede iniciar por una violencia sexual, puede iniciar por quien ha sido su pareja o su esposo, puede también darse en la comunidad ante el desprecio y la discriminación hacia las mujeres, y puede también darse, ahora lo ponemos en porque la mujer haya sido secuestrada, privada de la libertad. Pero hoy en día en México tenemos otro componente enorme, brutal, gravísimo, que es el crimen organizado. Hoy en día tenemos el feminicidio por crimen organizado, porque las mujeres somos mercancías para el crimen organizado. La trata de mujeres, la explotación sexual de niñas, de jovencitas, ha puesto en el centro, o la utilización para transporte de droga o armas, ha puesto también en el centro la muerte de las mujeres. Es decir, logramos, y yo quiero señalar que América Latina quizás somos el continente que más desafíos tenemos, porque la presencia de una cultura machista, discriminadora, nos pone en mayor riesgo. Las mujeres en América Latina hemos estado peleando por tener leyes contra el feminicidio. Las estamos teniendo. Tuve la suerte de estar coordinando el mecanismo de la Convención de Belén do Pará, una convención en verdad impresionante. Yo les pido que hagan el esfuerzo las mujeres americanas porque la ratifique Estados Unidos. Pero es una convención que nos permitió hacer el reporte en toda América Latina y el Caribe. Y ese primer reporte nos llevó a hacer una definición de feminicidio. Hoy casi toda América Latina tiene esta definición legal. Es todavía perfectible. Hay países que solo la tienen para la muerte en la vida familiar o doméstica, pero hay países que tienen una definición tan amplia como la mexicana. 3 países destacan por el alto índice de muertes de mujeres: El Salvador, Guatemala, México. Pero quiero decirles que en El Salvador y Guatemala han hecho un esfuerzo enorme. Tienen no solamente leyes, tienen fiscales, tienen jueces especializados, y eso ha permitido acabar con la impunidad. En México solo tenemos leyes, algunos fiscales, no tenemos ningún juez, y los feminicidios de mujeres no se investigan y no llegan a juicio. Este año pasado tuvimos 11 muertes de mujeres por día. 11 mujeres que no debieron haber muerto, porque el feminicidio se puede prevenir.
And that is only in Mexico, Patricia?
Yes, only in Mexico.
Okay, thank you for that.
11 mujeres.
Yes. Yeah.
11 mujeres diarios mueren. El año pasado tuvimos
extraordinary statistic. I noted in your materials that you sent, it is you state impunity. It is the impunity that for this violence that encourages the repetition of this human rights violation too. So there's just this huge problem of access to justice with this. Thank you so much for that, Patricia. And you know, as long as we are talking about access to justice, Nicole, perhaps you could. Oh, before I say move to Nicole, we did get a comment. I said, put your questions in the chat. I'm sorry about that. The chat's disabled. It's the Q&A. Please put your questions in the Q&A and we will be monitoring that. So thank you for, I think it was Manaz who let me know that. Thank you so much. Nicole, I noted in the report on missing and murdered Indigenous women that access to justice is also one of the points that the report makes so clearly. It also elaborates on, of course, the other just devastating dynamics of colonization and poverty. So talk about, if you would for a minute, that access to justice issue along with those other causes that you identify as contributing to this pandemic of missing and murdered Indigenous women.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think one of the things that is a really big challenge is we have very complex jurisdictional issues when it comes to addressing violence against Native women. And so in any one jurisdiction, if you are on tribal land, you may have 2 or 3 different jurisdictions. You may have the state that has jurisdiction over major crimes. You may have the federal government that has jurisdiction over federal crimes, and you have the tribe themselves. So we have what's called Public Law 280, and in Minnesota, we have both Public Law 280 and non-Public Law 280 tribes. And so in 9 of our reservations, we have the state that has concurrent jurisdiction with the tribe to address the major crimes. And 2 of our tribal communities has, the federal government has concurrent jurisdiction. Now, what makes it more challenging is that the tribes don't have any jurisdiction over non-native offenders. So essentially, if you go onto a tribal land and onto a tribal reservation and you murder a native woman, the tribe has no recourse to prosecute you. And so if the state or the federal government declines prosecution, which we know happens in a large number of cases, the tribe has, their hands are tied, they can't do anything about it. We have addressed that through some legislation years ago. The Tribal Law and Order Act addressed it, but that was only for domestic violence. And there's only a handful of tribes now that are positioned to be able to address that for domestic violence. But that does not, include, femicide. It does not include sexual violence. And so we have a long ways to go. And in addition, then, because of the complex jurisdictional issues, oftentimes when someone does call the police, there's question of whose responsibility is it to respond to these cases. And then sometimes you don't have anyone that's responding, or the response is inadequate. So there's many issues when it comes to access for justice, access to justice for Native women, that we have just fallen short and we can do better. And so we have a lot of, areas that we need to address to really be able to fully have accountability for these cases for Native women.
Thank you so much, Nicole. And I'm not sure we got that early statistics that cited in the report, or this. You cite a statistic, 1% of.
Oh yeah, there's.
To make sure.
So in Minnesota, we have 1% of our state population is American Indian women and girls, but we made up about 8% of all murdered women in the state. And so just looking at, that small number that we comprise here, and then the, disproportionately being murdered. And in addition, in addition to this is all the number of women who are missing. And in any given month, we have anywhere from 27 to 54 Native women who are missing, who are reported missing during any given month in Minnesota. So we have some huge, disproportionate numbers when it comes to this issue.
Thank you for that. It's just really alarming, and I don't think there's just so little, like you say, information about that available. So
Absolutely.
This report is so important, and I really encourage all the participants to take a look at it. Well, our time is going so fast, I can't believe it. So I want to turn to Patricia and Dubravka, and I would love your thoughts on, we know that particularly with domestic violence, the most common form of violence against women in the world, that isolation is a tool for abusers, even before COVID, certainly. Isolation and just keeping women away from remedies and help and support. Could you comment on your experience in your own work, on how COVID-19, the pandemic, has exacerbated, what effects have you seen with COVID-19? Maybe we could ask you first, Dubravka, and then we'll go to you, Patricia.
Thank you. before going to this question, may I just provide a little comment related to previous discussion. As a United Nations Special Rapporteur, I have visited Argentina and I have visited Ecuador and discussed collection of femicide data. I have also visited, this was official visits with recommendations, and I have visited El Salvador. I was also officially in Canada. And in all those countries, what is visible is that femicide data is not part on data on violence against women. So this is a separate data. So in order to see extent of violence against women in all countries all over the world, we need to have both data and data related to gender-based violence against women. So femicide data is data on violence. Femicide data is data on violence against women. Then let me go to your question and COVID-19 pandemic that was pandemic inside which we had another gender-based violence against women pandemic that started long before COVID and that is now intersecting with COVID, and that will probably stay with us after the COVID. And we have seen at the beginning gender-blind lockdown measures that forced women to stay at home. They were confined in many occasions with perpetrator violence without having possibilities to access shelters and to have efficient protection orders. So we have seen in many states all over the world that such lockdown measures and situation related to COVID exposed pre-existing shortcomings related to elimination and prevention of violence against women. I have seen also some good examples because there are alternatives. For example, if shelters are not available, then some countries have opened possibilities for women in such situation to go to hotels. Then some countries established email services for protection orders. So there were significant modifications, but overall, we are seeing increase of calls to helplines. We are seeing increase with respect to data on violence against women, and especially domestic violence, and also data on femicides. The main problem with femicide data today is how do we really have comparable data? What are those data that are collected at state level? So here we are still challenged by different legal systems in different states, because in some states there are data only on homicides. In other states, like Patricia explained, there are specific data on homicides and on femicides. So now, in order to see what is happening all over the world, because now UNODC, as UN agency collecting data on homicide, now they are also having specific report on gender-related killings of women. And from that report, the highest number of femicides are happening in African countries and Asian countries. So we have to see how we are collecting data. And I just to mention with respect to indigenous women and girls, I was member of CEDAW committee, and we had inquiry related to Mexico and murder of indigenous women and girls. So that inquiry was very important, inquiry on femicides and lack of access to justice for such women. So the situation is comparable, and it would be very important if United States would ratify the CEDAW Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. Then this instance could be also available to indigenous women facing such problems, because in some countries it is impunity with respect to prosecution of perpetrators. In other countries it is lack of preventive measures related to different femicides in intimate partner context at domestic level. So we have to see in each country, from those cases that are happening in country context, what are key measures for prevention?
Thank you so much, Dubravka. That statistic that you mentioned from, Dubravka mentioned the statistics from UNODC, United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime. just recently, well, not that recently anymore, but in 2018, I think, published another report that was, I think such an important statistic that over 50,000 women per year, that's 137 women per day in 2017, were murdered by family members, and most of them were men murdering women in their families. So again, a statistic that we just haven't had until 2018. Patricia, I want to get back to you. What do you know about the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic on femicides and violence against women in Mexico, in your region?
Bueno, hablaré de México, aunque hay un reporte de CEPAL, de la Comisión Económica para América Latina, muy importante sobre los efectos de COVID en el tema de derechos de las mujeres y violencia. Pero quisiera hablar de México porque quizá ejemplifica un poco lo que pasa. Desde mediados del año pasado, los grupos feministas en México empezaron a alertar sobre el crecimiento de la violencia en los hogares. El gobierno no tomó con seriedad los reportes y las llamadas de emergencia, pero se empezaron a recolectar esas llamadas, y esas llamadas nos dio un panorama enorme, más de 1 millón de llamadas. Pero de esas llamadas, y este es un dato muy importante porque tiene que ver con la prevención, 220,000 mujeres presentaron, a pesar del confinamiento, una denuncia penal por ser víctimas de violencia doméstica. 220,000. 67,000 mujeres mexicanas fueron a un hospital o fueron atendidas por lesiones de arma de fuego, por apuñalamiento, por fracturas. Este es otro dato en materia de prevención. ¿Qué dijimos las mujeres en México? Atiendan esos casos, porque la realidad es que ellas estaban en peligro de perder la vida. Quizá no sucedió, pero ahí teníamos a las víctimas. Y otro dato también muy fuerte que forma parte de estadística de feminicidio son las desapariciones. El año pasado desaparecieron casi 5,000 mujeres, de las cuales el 70% eran menores de 17 años. ¿Qué pasó con esas niñas? Entonces tenemos una problemática muy fuerte y tenemos un nivel de impunidad enorme en el país. El nivel de impunidad en México para los temas de violencia contra las mujeres es del 94%. Es decir, que solo unas cuantas denuncias llegan a un juzgado. La impunidad es lo más grave y es el principal impedimento para que las mujeres sean atendidas. ¿Qué pasó con esas mujeres? ¿Quién cuidó a esas mujeres? ¿Qué pasó con los hijos de las mujeres que desaparecieron? ¿Qué pasó con esas niñas? O sea, pero hoy finalmente podemos tener alguna información. Hace 2 años no lo teníamos. Eso nos permite ver que en el 2018 en México se cometían 9 asesinatos de mujeres al día. Hoy se cometen 11. Es decir, las cifras crecieron también en esta pandemia y a pesar de esta pandemia.
Thank you, Patricia, so much for that. And I can see that Nicole wants to say something here, and we're going to get to the questions. Thank you, Pat. I see you coming on there. I just want to emphasize how, when we talk about femicide, I hear all of you saying, femicide is, as we heard in the definitions, is the most extreme form of discrimination and inequality. But think about the levels of violence against women that are and girls that are occurring around the world that never end up in femicide, but end up in devastating harm for the lifetimes of women and girls. We talk about femicide, I think, in the data, because oftentimes that is what gets the attention of our elected officials to improve policy and law and practice and remedies. But I really encourage the participants to think about the tip of the iceberg, certainly, is the femicides. Even the reporting, those who even report violence is another level of it, the highest level. And underneath that are so much more violence against women that leads up to these femicides, or maybe never results in femicide at all, but continues to devastate the lives of women and girls. And both of you, Patricia and Nicole, focus on the issue of disappeared women. And again, just revealing the devastating, deadly, dangerous intersection between race and gender, I think. Nicole, would you like to comment on that?
Well, it reminds me of when we were doing the interviews for our Garden of Truth research. One of the women told a story that one of the sex buyers said to her, "I thought we killed all of you." And that really is the level of violence that not only are women encountering on the street, but the sentiment that people have when they think of us. It is how our daughters are met on the street. It is how people look at us. And I just, it's just so telling. It was so telling to me when I heard that. That is really what we're talking about.
Right. Thank you for that, Nicole. So I think what we'll do now, because we're almost, we're about 8 minutes away from 1 o'clock, and we want to give the participants a chance to ask questions. And then I'd like to end after the questions by so if you could all be thinking about what can people do? What are, you all have recommendations in the documents that you've written and published, and maybe you can think of something to say today to our participants about how can they be engaged in this issue? How can they be involved in ending the pandemic of violence against women and femicide? Pat, we have some questions for our panelists.
Yes, we have lots of questions. I don't know if we'll be able to get to them all. We do have a very important question about the land acknowledgement, and Christina would like to address it. I'm going to read the question. Why does this land acknowledgement mention the land was ceded, yet leave out the very important fact that the treaty was never honored? Hence, the University of Minnesota is on stolen land, paid for with the blood and bodies of Dakota women who were the original victims of femicide on this land.
So thank you to Ann, who raised that important question. Today I used the land acknowledgement that was written by the Institute for Advanced Study here at the University of Minnesota. At other times I have expanded on the land acknowledgement to fit the particular event that we're hosting. As some of you in the audience may know, having an official land acknowledgement at the University of Minnesota is quite contested. And I would agree very much with this, the person who posed this question, that this version that I read is missing. The fact that this is stolen land, not just simply ceded in the treaties that I mentioned. And it would have been very appropriate for me to mention the role that Dakota women played in that period of history. So I appreciate the question very much. Pat, should I since I am on camera, should I now pose the question to Patricia Torres that's in Spanish in the
Yes,
question and answer?
yes, yes,
Okay.
please.
So we have one question in Spanish that is posed to Patricia that asks, ¿dónde puedo encontrar datos sobre la violencia hacia las mujeres indígenas? ¿Hay datos sobre los femicidios de las mujeres indígenas? ¿Puedo obtener estos datos por parte del gobierno federal o por parte de los gobiernos estatales? Pregunto porque estoy trabajando en un reporte sobre la violencia hacia las mujeres indígenas. Muchas gracias.
¿Quieren que la conteste de una vez?
Yes, please.
Okay. Los datos en México aún no son tan confiables. Apenas se están recolectando. Yo quiero decirles que tenemos aproximadamente 8 millones de personas que son población originaria de los pueblos originarios de México, de los cuales un poco más del 50% son mujeres. Somos un país pluriétnico, pluricultural, se hablan 56 idiomas en México y hay comunidades en donde solo hablan su idioma. Las comunidades indígenas mantienen usos y costumbres que son las formas como ellos se gobiernan. Esto es bien complicado porque dentro de esos usos y costumbres todavía se mantiene la entrega de niñas en matrimonio o en unión. Todavía existe venta de niñas para matrimonio. Muchas de estas mujeres solo hablan su idioma, no pueden comunicarse con otros. Y la información sobre violencia es muy limitada porque ellos mismos ocultan muchas de estas situaciones. Entonces, la información que se tiene de algunos estados, principalmente con población indígena, ahorita es limitada, pero yo les diré que, por ejemplo, Oaxaca, Chiapas, que tienen población indígena alta, están empezando a reportar las comunidades indígenas. Y estamos empezando a conocer la problemática. Por ejemplo, Oaxaca tiene un alto número de mujeres indígenas víctimas de trata de personas, que no lo sabíamos. Entonces, la información es muy limitada todavía, pero hay organizaciones de mujeres indígenas haciendo un gran trabajo. Y eso es lo importante, pero no hemos podido, pues, romper ese círculo de los usos y costumbres que impiden que las mujeres puedan hablar. Entonces, no le puedo dar un dato real porque no están los reportes todavía en las páginas, salvo de algunos estados.
That is so typical, Patricia, that the data can't, it's either not available or it can't really be relied on. I'm just curious, why do you think the increase in reporting? You mentioned an increase in reporting.
Porque finalmente las autoridades han empezado a decir los casos que reciben. Por ejemplo, Oaxaca. Hasta hace 3 años no teníamos ningún informe. Hoy empiezan a existir reportes de las comunidades indígenas. Es decir, está empezando a darse esto. O algunos casos, las organizaciones de mujeres indígenas lo han sacado, lo han informado a la comunidad. O sea, ellas finalmente son las que están diciendo, esto nos está pasando, esto estamos viviendo. Y eso es un gran avance porque no teníamos esa posibilidad.
You're muted, Cheryl.
That is such an important point. I just wanted to point that out. You know, when more women are reporting violence, that's a sign of something improving, because they're willing to talk about it. They're maybe possibly more confident, whether justified or not, that they may have a remedy in the legal system or somebody may help them. So it's easy to think that when statistics go up, that it's a terrible sign, but in some cases, it's actually a very good sign that there's confidence and awareness about the human right to be free from violence.
Yeah, and I can say that in the chat, there's actually a number of questions that are very related about finding information and data, including the Mideast, Kenya, South Africa. Those were mentioned in the chat. So I'm wondering if maybe Dubravka, how can people find information?
Thank you. They can find information also on my mandate's website. You put the name of the whole mandate and the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, and data that I have collected on femicides in past 5 years are published on mandate's website. So in each year, I'm calling states and other stakeholders, including non-governmental organizations, ombudspersons, all those that have established femicide observatories or watches, to send me data related to femicide, intimate partner femicide, family-related femicides, and other femicides, and also to send me data about recommendations and work in area of prevention, because it's not only data. It is very important to look into analysis of cases and potential that we have through analysis of cases to focus on measures of prevention. But data for specific countries could also be found at United Nations Office and Drug and Crimes report on homicide, with sub-report on gender-related killings of women. And those countries that are sending homicide data, those data are now under the category for intimate partner killings and family-related killings. They are now in this specific report on gender-related killings of women. In general, there is lack of comparable data. I am cooperating with MESECWI, monitoring body under Belém do Pará, and other monitoring bodies in Europe, like Gravio, with CEDAW committee and others, in order to see what are those comparable categories that are showing. Cheryl, for example, in cases of killings, if we have increase, then it is objective category. Then it is not related to reporting. This is unfortunately showing that something is wrong, that something is worse in the country. And during the COVID, we have seen increase of femicide cases. But how to compare? Only those states that had data before COVID on femicides collected under those categories of intimate partner and family-related killings, that are objective categories based on relationship between victim and perpetrator. They can compare data after COVID period, because they will see which type of increase they had in each category. Other countries will not really be able to compare. Other countries would not be able to compare data. So for this reason, data is only first step, and we should not rely only on data. We should rely on analysis of cases from human rights perspective, using human rights obligations accepted by states. And there are many emblematic cases that are showing so many issues related to possible prevention. So I was in Ecuador. The case in Ecuador that I have seen is similar to a case in Germany, France, Italy, whatever country all over the world. Because if you detect that, for example, protection orders are very weak, or police would need a long period to go to home to address violence against women, or protection order should be issued in next 3 days, or too long period for situation that needs urgent measure. Then you are seeing what should be changed. So through analysis of cases, we are going in direction of prevention. So it's not only data, it is also analysis of specific emblematic cases that are showing direction for prevention.
Yeah, and it's
Thank you.
such an important point, and it's so beautifully highlighted in both the report or the materials that Patricia has shared and Nicole has shared, that there are other ways to analyze what's happening to women and what the intervention is and the remedies that they have access to. So thank you for that, Dubravka. Why don't we take one more question, Pat, and then I would love to end with each of you just really identifying an important way that participants can be involved in ending violence against women in their communities, globally. So why don't we end that way, if you could be thinking about that. And Pat, do you have one more question there?
Yes, I do. This is a question for Nicole. And there's a comment. First off, thank you so much for your impactful work. Can you explain why there's a resistance on the part of the state jurisdiction to be engaged in investigating these crimes when it is non-natives committing the crimes on native land?
Yeah, thank you. That's a really great question. And there's not an easy answer to that question. You know, I think it really depends. You know, with the response on the federal level, sometimes there's no response unless it rises to a certain level. And when it comes down to local and state governments, and could be federal government, I think it sometimes comes down to racism and to the lack of accountability and the relationships that the tribe has with that local jurisdiction. For instance, we know that many tribal communities, their land is on, you know, several different counties. It crosses across several other state jurisdictions or counties, particularly in Minnesota, and they may have a great working relationship with two of those jurisdictions and not a great relationship with the last one. And so what that comes down to, what that means is there's less response on that jurisdiction. When someone calls law enforcement, there may be little to no response. There's less collaboration in working on the crimes. And sometimes we have seen where in fact they don't even want to acknowledge the local tribal police. Now I think we've gone particularly in Minnesota, we've come a long way and built some really solid relationships in many of our communities. But I definitely think, you know, we have a long ways to go to really be addressing that across the board and to be able to provide the accountability and the safety for our women and girls.
Thank you for that, Nicole. But why don't we follow up with you then? And what if you had one? That's a terrible question. But what is an important way that our participants can be involved in the issues that are addressed in your report?
You know, I think it's important for people to get educated on some of these issues and to know what's really happening, because it's hard to do something if you don't know what it is. And I think it's also important to be holding our systems accountable and to be pushing policy and legislation at all levels, because that's where we can really impact change. And then also to be holding all of those systems accountable and to connecting with people in their local community, to be supporting, maybe it's volunteering or fundraising or donating to their local community organizations, I think is really critical. And to show up it really makes a difference when people show up. Every year on Valentine's Day in Minnesota, where it's really cold, we have a huge march and rally when it's non-COVID, and having our non-native relatives show up with us really makes an impact, and it shows our community and it shows our legislators in our state that people really care about this issue and they want something done. So.
Excellent. Thank you, Nicole. Patricia, why don't we go to you next? The question is, if you have one thing.
Bueno, yo quiero comentarles muy rápido. Lo que hicimos en México el año pasado y lo seguimos haciendo este año las organizaciones de mujeres. Creamos un mecanismo de diálogo que le pusimos: nosotras las mujeres tenemos otros datos. Y le dimos la voz a las organizaciones locales y empezamos a darnos cuenta que entre los datos oficiales y los reales había grandes diferencias. Y empezó a ser muy importante nuestra información que dábamos cada semana, que ya la prensa esperaba nuestra información, pero le dimos también mucho poder a las organizaciones locales que se atrevieron a decir lo que estaba mal. Y este es un ejercicio que hemos continuado. Ahora, ¿yo qué le diría a la población? No nos quedemos calladas, sobre todo a las mujeres. Hay que creerle a las víctimas, siempre hay que creerle. Segundo, tenemos que tener conciencia que las muertes de mujeres se pueden evitar, se pueden prevenir, y quizá nuestro apoyo es fundamental para evitar una muerte de una mujer y seguir apoyando a las defensoras que siguen trabajando con las mujeres para cuidar su vida o su seguridad. Apoyemos todos. Este mundo puede ser mejor para las mujeres del que es.
Wonderful. Thank you, Patricia. Yeah, I love that. We do not have to accept this. This is preventable. Not only the femicide, but the violence. There are ways we know to do this, and maybe we'll have another 3-day webinar on what all those ways are, best practices around the world. But there is so much acceptance of violence against women that just has to end. Dubravka.
I fully agree. Femicides are preventable and states are responsible for prevention of femicides. So we need to hold states accountable. So for that reason, I am calling for femicide watches or observatories in all states, regions, and at the UN level. It is also important to have women's marches like Ni Una Menos in Argentina, in other countries, in Mexico, but in other European countries. Now we are seeing women's marches on different topics related to violence against women that are really pressing governments to change, to go into the direction of changing laws, practices, and addressing all those issues that are not properly addressed. I would also like to suggest that all those that are listening us, each individual could do something. I have in my reports good practices from non-governmental organizations, even individuals that are collecting data on femicides from public resources, putting everything on a website. NGOs in United Kingdom are having also big database on femicides happened in past 5 years. There are different possibilities at different levels to focus on data, but also on analysis of cases in order to prevent femicides and to hold governments accountable.
You're muted.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dubravka. Thank you to all of our panelists, Patricia, Nicole, Dubravka, your dedication, your life's work dedication is just a gift to all of us in the world. And I thank you for that. And I'm going to turn it over back to Christina now. And thank you to the participants.
Thank you.
Well, that is the closeout of our event today. I want to extend a huge thank you to Cheryl Thomas and Global Rights for Women for coordinating this event with us today and our 5 university partners. And a special thanks to Dubravka, Nicole, and Patricia. I learned an incredible amount from this discussion today and only wish we could have stayed on for another hour to go through the really important questions that so many of the audience have raised in the Q&A section. So I want to remind everybody that we have one more event related to this series that is coming up next week, Wednesday, March 10th at 9 a.m. Dr. Rahel Nardos will be speaking on Obstetric Fistula, a window into disparities in women's health and a call for reimagining global health engagements. I also want to let you know that this event has been recorded. Those who have registered will receive an email letting you know when the recording is ready for view and where to access it. And we've also put together at the website at the bottom of the slide that I just showed, and we will also email to you a list of resources, many of the reports and data that our participants have mentioned today in this talk, if you wanted to continue to learn about this. And I'm certainly inspired to continue and engage in these issues after the final comments of our speakers today. Thank you for joining us.